Hello, this is Father Michael Nasser coming to you from St. Nicholas Orthodox Church here in Grand Rapids, Michigan for this week's Midweek Reflection. And this week I am reflecting on dealing with challenge and loss and difficulty. And I'll tell you why I've been reflecting and thinking about that for a couple of days. This past Sunday I gave a homily, and it was a little bit of a tricky one because I wanted to talk about how people are rediscovering the most important things in life when they lose so much of the material possessions, as we've seen happen thousands of times over in Southern California due to the fires that are there. And it's tricky because you don't want people to hear like, oh, well, God doesn't care and God takes things away. No, that's the wrong idea. But the right idea is how to face, how to make sense of the fact when we lose things or even people or situations or strength or health. How do we deal with it? And that's when, in my Bible reading this morning, the answer came. Sometimes we just have to answer the question long enough, and then the answers come. I've been reading, I started a new Bible in a Year program this past January 1st. We're now halfway through January, and I'm finishing up the book of Genesis, which is incredible for so many things. There's so much in Genesis. Think about it. Adam and Eve, and Cain and Abel, and Noah, and Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Then you get to the story of Joseph, which really is a big chunk. The story of Joseph being, thrown into the pit, then sold into slavery, he goes to Egypt and all the rest. So the part I was at today, it's the last chapter. And Joseph is now going to reveal himself to his brothers. They sold him into slavery, and now he's second in command of all Egypt under Pharaoh himself. And the brothers come down to ask for food because there's a famine in the land. And there's this back and forth dialogue where he doesn't really tell them who he is. Eventually he reveals himself, and he's so joyful to see his family again. He wants to see his father. And he says this statement in that last chapter. And he's talking to his brothers who sold him into slavery. And he said, you meant that for evil. God meant it for good. You meant that for evil. God meant it for good. That doesn't mean that God did that. God didn't throw him in a pit. God didn't send him to slavery. What it does mean is that everything that happens to us, and that includes the really tough stuff, God takes it. He didn't create it that way, put it that way. He didn't set an emotion necessarily, but he means it for good. And that's such an important thing I think all of us need to think about, is not just how difficult life is. Maybe you've got a terrible diagnosis lately, or you lost your job, or somebody mistreated you, respected you, whatever. Those are challenging situations. And there's things that have to be worked through and dealt with, but never should we deal with that outside of the reality that all those things that maybe somebody actually did mean purposely for evil, but even those things, God meant for good. They're good things. In fact, some good things that wouldn't have necessarily come out if we didn't go through those challenging things. That's where there's so much value in suffering. Not that God wants it, but he allows it. And one of the reasons he allows it is there's so much good that comes out of it for us. So I want to invite you to contemplate along with me, reflect on this idea that whatever anybody meant intentionally or unintentionally for evil, God meant for good. And if he means it for good, then whatever it is that we're losing, suffering with, struggling through, will pale in the comparison to what God can do with all of that difficulty. And we come out of the other side just immeasurably better than we were before. So I'd like you to reflect and think about the challenge in your life today. You have to face it. You got to deal with it. You got to do difficult things to go through it. But hopefully we don't take one step as we go through those difficulties without thinking, how is God going to make this for good and mean it for good? So I hope you find that valuable. If so, please share with family, friends, relatives, neighbors, and God willing, we'll see you in next week's video.